Here we are in the Prairie Orchard. We're now at April 17th, 2016, and we're on a little bit of an orchard walk looking for some blossoms. And this is our wild goose plum. We can see actually that these blossoms are just a few days away from opening up. This is going to be the first time this tree has bloomed in full. A large number of blossoms on this tree. This here is our white doyen, and it's loaded with blossoms. It's just impressive how many blossoms are on this tree. It's got some height. Grew a lot last year during sort of an off year with fruit, so it has some fluctuation to its fruit production, but it's going to be marvelous this year. And then I'll look down our pear row. This is our unknown pear tree, originally billed as a bosque, but the pears look more like an Anjou, and it seems to have flowers primarily at the tips of its branches. Pretty consistent on all these different branches, so must be something inherent in this particular variety. So we'll see what kind of crop we get again this year. This here is our Moonglow pear tree. It's on a quince rootstock, so it's going to grow short. That has been planted here along this trellis. I'm going to convert it into an espalier. This plant was planted not last spring, but the spring before. And look at this, it's got some blooms coming out. This is the first set of blooms that this tree has had. I really do want this tree to grow some more so I can lay it along the wires here and stretch out the limbs in a two-dimensional fan. But I'm also curious to see what kind of fruit it has this year. So I'm sort of stuck with deciding whether I want to cut out the fruit and let the tree grow, or see what some of the fruit looks like at the expense of maybe some growth this year. So Moonglow pear. This here is one of the first apple trees I planted up here in our apple orchard, and it has had blooms every year for the past 3 years, but these blooms have never produced fruit beyond the size of 1 centimeter. The fruitlets have died off if they've developed at all, and it really hasn't grown very big either, the tree that is. It was initially billed to us as a Caville Blanc d'Hiver, but I doubt very much that's the case, as the tree next to it, which was billed as a different fruit tree, turned out to be the Caville Blanc d'Hiver. I'll show that to you in a minute. Anyway, it has pretty blossoms that will no doubt flower in the next week or so, but whether it will develop any fruit is questionable. I'm thinking about getting this tree out and replacing it. Last year, this apple tree produced its first apples, and they, by appearance, were Caville Blanc d'Hiver, French cooking apple. This year, as you can see, we have a large number of flower buds forming on these branches. This looks like it's going to be an incredible year for apples on this particular tree. Just get up nice and close and show you. You can see even within a hand's breadth on this limb, there must be 9 or 10 flower buds or flowers, each with the capacity of making maybe 3 to 5 fruit. So pretty exciting. We may have to thin this one out this year. This here is the third of 3 apple trees that I obtained from a local nursery that I think was very sloppy with the way it labeled its apple trees. It was billed as an Asapus Spitzenberg, but the apples really don't look like an Asapus Spitzenberg. They're large red apples with some russeting, and they taste very starchy when you first pick them, but after 3 weeks or so they develop a very nice mellow sweet flavor. So I like this apple. It just takes a little bit of patience. This year we have, again, a few blossoms. Here's one up high, another one over here, And there's some that are scattered throughout the tree, one right in the center there. So this will produce a handful of apples this year at best, as it's done over the past couple years. And we'll be sure to take care of them and harvest them out in September and store them for a good 3 weeks to a month before eating them. Unknown apple. This one here is our Westfield Seek No Further. It was planted a year or two after some of the original trees, so it's a little younger. I'm excited to see actually some flower buds on this tree for the first time. So we may actually have some Westfield Seek No Further apples this year. There's one right there. And then there's a couple more buds out there towards the center of the tree. The tree looks healthy overall, and that thickening of the bark that I saw earlier on this tree has dissipated, so this didn't turn out to be a diseased tree, which is great news. Westfield Seek No Further. This is our Prairie Irish Pippin. It's younger even than the Westfield Seek No Further. It's grown about 6 feet tall. That's the tallest twig, so still just a young tree, but we are seeing flower buds, the first flower buds showing up on this tree this year. So we may very well have some apples, our first Prairie Irish Pippin. This tree here, that's about 7 feet tall, is our Roxbury russet. This was one of the first varieties developed here in the colonies. The belief is that seeds or some sort of twig were brought over from the old world to the new world, and in Roxbury, just outside of Boston, this tree developed and became the first known American variety, and it looks like it has its first flower ever here in this orchard. Still a relatively young tree and only one flower, but really exciting. We may very well see our first Roxbury russet apple this year. I'm here in the southern apple corner of my orchard, and I'm looking at a tree that's about 7 feet tall called Hall. It's a very old southern apple. It was very popular in Tennessee. And I'm not showing it because there are any flowers or blossoms on their way, but I'm showing this apple tree because we got something special here. It looks like a praying mantis nest in this tree. But I'm excited about this tree. It's supposedly a smaller green apple with some red on it that's very tasty. It was very, very popular back in the 1800s, and I think it was ignored thereafter when bigger apples became sort of the fad. But anyway, it looks pretty healthy, and it looks like it's going to have a whole lot of green and leaves this year, and hopefully will grow quickly. This here is our Jefferson plum. Planted just a few years ago. This has now grown to probably 16, 17 feet and has an abundance of blossoms. This is the second year we've had blossoms. There were no fruit last year. It's supposed to be self-fertile. It's an American variety. And actually really neat. If you look closely, you'll see a lot of the native American bees, small bees, flying in there, hopefully pollinating these flowers. So hopefully we'll get some fruit this year. I may need to cut this tree back a little bit, and certainly if all of these flowers are fertilized, we're going to have to thin the fruit. That would be a wonderful thing to have to do, of course. But just take a look at these bees doing their work. I should point out that not a single one of them is the European honeybee. It turns out that America has its own supply of bees that actually can fulfill pollination, but in order to have this type of pollination taking place, you need to have some land set aside where the bees can actually burrow and set up nests. And that's what's missing in agricultural America right now, and why we rely so heavily on a foreign bee to do our pollination. This is our red Bartlett. It is now probably about 15 feet tall. It has a number of blossoms this year in the top half of the tree. As you can see, they have a little bit of red coloring to them, which parallels the color of the fruit. This tree seems to have some variation from year to year in the amount of fruit it produces. One year, barely any fruit. The next year, a moderate amount of fruit. Not a terribly productive tree. The red Bartlett, or red Bon Chrétien. The green Bartlett seems to be a little bit steadier in its production. This is a relatively small tree that I think is going to stay small, and really has a large number of blossoms. From year to year, there's only a little bit of variation. It actually has a fair number of fruit even in a light year. Looks like we're going to have a good year this year. This is one of our 2 apricot trees. It's grown maybe 18 feet tall. It has a number of blossoms on it. Not a huge number, but a fair number. Looking forward to some apricots again this year. This is one of our 2 cherry trees. About 15 feet tall, lots of blossoms every year. The challenge with the cherries is actually that we're not using any insecticides, and some of the blossoms get infected with a parasite. When you pick the fruit, there's larvae surrounding the pit at the center of the fruit. So we tend to pick the fruit and then open up the fruit before eating it. It's tasty when we can get some samples without the larvae, of course.